On the camera screen, I saw a girl without eyes. Her empty black holes sucked in the light, and it seemed her very soul. Money. It all came down to money. Trite, I know, but it was money that made me, a 28-year-old, agree to this job. Night guard at a school. It sounded almost like a joke. My old school. The painfully familiar corridors where I once played ball and copied tests. What could be easier? I imagined quiet nights doing crossword puzzles, with occasional patrols of the premises. Naive fool. If only I had known what a trap I was walking into. The previous guard, a gray-haired, haggard man with faded eyes, met me at the entrance. He said almost nothing. He just silently handed me a heavy bunch of keys that chilled my palm. His gaze was empty, as if he were looking through me. As I was about to close the heavy oak door behind him, he turned around. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but every word stuck in my memory. "One piece of advice, boy," he croaked, his breath smelling musty like an old grave. "Don't fall asleep, under no circumstances." I just nodded, trying to look confident. Nonsense, I thought. The old man was probably just tired from insomnia. The door closed with a dull thud that echoed through the empty corridors. That sound became the boundary that separated my normal life from the nightmare that lay ahead. The first few hours passed quietly. I sat in a small room near the entrance where the video surveillance monitors were located. Dozens of screens showed empty classrooms, a quiet gym, deserted corridors. Everything was gray, mundane, and ridiculously peaceful. I even began to mock myself for the momentary fear caused by the old man's words. A familiar building, simple duties. What could go wrong? I didn't know yet that the silence within these walls could scream louder than any sound, and that the darkness hides what should not see the light of day, and that this night would change me forever, turning my life into an endless whisper from the past.
Around 1 o'clock in the morning, I decided to take my first walk around. I needed to stretch my legs and make sure everything was okay. The silence was deafening, broken only by the creaking of my soles. Each step echoed in the endless corridors, as if someone was following me, copying my movements. I tried not to pay attention to it, attributing it all to my imagination. The first strange thing awaited me on the second floor, near the chemistry lab. I heard a noise. It was barely audible, as if someone was rearranging glass flasks. I stopped and listened. The noise stopped. I pulled the door handle. It was locked. I looked through the small window in the door. In the moonlight streaming through the huge windows, I saw only rows of desks and posters with the periodic table on the walls. No one. Probably just my imagination. I moved on, but anxiety had already settled in my chest like a cold knot. In the gym, I noticed that several lockers in the girls' changing room were ajar. I remembered clearly that when I took over the shift, everything was closed. I cautiously peered inside. Empty. Only a faint smell of dampness and forgotten children's perfume. I closed the door, and the metallic clang seemed deafening in the dead silence. But the worst was yet to come. Returning to my cubicle, I saw them. On the freshly washed floor, glistening in the light of my flashlight, was a trail of footprints. Small, barefoot, childish footprints. And they were wet. as if a child had just come out of a swimming pool, which this school never had. The footprints led from a dark corner of the corridor and disappeared near the door to the archive. My heart was pounding wildly. I slowly followed the footprints, feeling my hair stand on end. The door to the archive, which should have been locked, was slightly ajar. I stood in front of the dark abyss of the doorway, from which came a cold draft and the smell of rot, the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something sweet and sickening. And from this darkness came a barely audible whisper. It sounded like a child's voice, but there was nothing innocent about it. It was the whisper of something ancient and evil. I stood there paralyzed with horror, realizing that the old man's warning was not empty words. I was not alone here, and what was here with me did not belong to the world of the living.
I didn't dare enter the archive. Something inside me screamed that it was a one-way ticket. I rushed back to my cubicle, my heart beating like a bird in a cage. I closed the door and sat down in front of the monitors, trying to calm my breathing. My hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold a glass of water. That's when I saw movement on one of the screens. The camera in the archive, the same one I had just been standing in front of. The image flickered, but I could clearly see that the door had opened wider. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness. A child, a girl of about 10, dressed in an old-school uniform, a white dress. Her hair was braided into 2 tight pigtails. She stood motionless, looking straight into the camera. And then she raised her head, and I froze. She had no eyes. Instead, there were 2 black, bottomless abysses that sucked in the light and, it seemed, the very soul. I recoiled from the monitor, nearly knocking over my chair. This is impossible. It's just a play of light and shadow, a malfunction of the old camera. I tried to find any rational explanation, clutching at it like a drowning man clutches at a straw. Next to the monitors lay an old, tattered folder with instructions. I opened it, hoping to find something about equipment malfunctions. My fingers flipped through the yellowed pages until they came across something that shouldn't have been there. On the last page, in crooked, shaky handwriting, a few words were scribbled. It was not printed text, but a note left by someone who had sat in this same place before me, perhaps the same old security guard. Don't answer if he calls your name. And at the very moment I finished reading these words, a quiet, ringing child's voice came from the speakers connected to the surveillance system. It was clear and at the same time eerily distorted, like an echo from a deep well. Cheek. It whispered. I froze, feeling cold sweat running down my back. The girl on the screen didn't move her lips, but I knew it was her. She stood motionless, her black, abysmal eyes staring straight at me. She knew my name, and she was waiting for an answer. I didn't answer. The warning words burned in my mind. I just sat there, staring at the monitor, while the girl with black eyes stood in the archive. And then, something even stranger happened. The images on all the monitors flickered and distorted at the same time. When the image returned, school was no longer the same as before. The corridors on the screens seemed longer, distorted, as if you were looking at them through a crooked mirror. The walls pulsated, contracting and expanding as if the building were breathing. I couldn't sit still any longer. This was madness. I had to get out of there.
I jumped out of the closet and ran down the hallway, but it was no longer the hallway I had walked down a minute ago. It stretched on forever. The classroom doors were warped, and the light from a single bulb barely penetrated the thick, sticky darkness. In the abandoned classrooms, I saw them. Dark, blurry silhouettes of children. They stood by their desks, by the blackboard, in the middle of the room, and stared at me silently. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their gaze on my skin. Suddenly, a whisper came from one of the classrooms, and I stopped dead in my tracks. It was my voice. It repeated my own thoughts, my fears. I have to run. They're everywhere. I'm going to die here, whispered a child's figure in the darkness in my own voice. A boy slowly emerged from around the corner. He was younger than the girl from the archive, but his eyes were the same black abyss. His hands were covered in something dark and sticky up to his elbows. Blood. He looked at me imploringly and whispered, "Don't go. Please don't go. He gets angry when you leave." "Who is he?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. The boy didn't answer. He just pointed a trembling finger somewhere behind me. I turned around but saw no one. Returning to my prison room, I stared at the monitors again, hoping to find at least some island of reality. But what I saw completely destroyed my connection to the world. On the camera in the gym, a jump rope was swinging, bouncing in the air as if an invisible child had just thrown it. The mirror in the dance class reflected a figure, although the class itself was empty. On the scariest camera, the one pointed at my own cubicle, I saw myself. Well, not exactly myself. It was a copy of me sitting in my chair, but it wasn't looking at the monitors in horror. It was looking straight into the camera lens, and there was a wide, unnatural, sinister smile on its face. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sharp, deafening ring. The doorbell rang. It rang again and again, insistently, demanding. Who the hell could be coming here at 3 a.m? I got up, my legs barely holding me. Slowly, as if walking to the scaffold, I approached the door. No one was visible in the small glass window, only the darkness of the schoolyard. I was already beginning to think it was another hallucination when I saw her. There was a print on the glass, at my waist level, a small child's palm pressed against the glass from the other side, and it was fresh. Panic finally took hold of me. I ran. I didn't know where. The corridors intertwined into an impossible maze. The walls curved. The floor swayed beneath my feet. It seemed to me that I had been running for hours, but I couldn't find the exit. In desperation, I rushed into the teacher's room, hoping to find a phone to call the police, even though part of me knew it was useless. The room was in disarray. Papers were scattered, chairs were overturned. On the table, among a pile of old notebooks, lay a heavy, leather-bound class register. It was old, dating back to Soviet times. I don't know what made me open it. Perhaps it was the same force that had been playing with me all night. I flipped through the pages covered in calligraphic handwriting. A list of students. Almost all the names were neatly crossed out in black ink. Line after line. Surname after surname. All except one. At the end of the list, under the letter D, was the only name that had not been crossed out. Mine. Jack. As I stared at my name, not believing my eyes, right on the page, under my surname, new letters began to appear, as if an invisible hand was writing them in blood, The letters formed words, and I read them, feeling the last remnants of sanity leaving me. Go back to class. Everyone is waiting. I could no longer resist. An invisible force pulled me out of the staff room and led me down the corridor. I knew where I was going, to class 4A. The door was ajar, and a strange, cold light was pouring out. I entered. Children were sitting at their desks, the same ones whose silhouettes I had seen in the darkness. Now I could see them clearly. They were dressed in old-school uniforms, their faces pale and devoid of any emotion. They stared at me silently with their empty eyes. The same boy was standing at the blackboard. He was holding a piece of white chalk in his hand. When I entered, he handed it to me. "Write your name," he whispered, in a voice that seemed to echo from every corner of the classroom. I took the chalk. It was ice cold. I walked up to the blackboard. My hand moved on its own. I couldn't stop it. Next to my last name, in the attendance column, I wrote a single word: present.